Well done.
Thank you.
What ideas do you all have? What questions do you have? There's a mic around here, and we can start with, and the mayor's got one. Why don't you run it back there to Andrew Bird, Mayor. All right. And Andrew, go ahead and stand. We can probably hear you without a mic.
Right next to I-440, just the increase in traffic delays. It was printed in a scene. Could you re-familiarize us with that?
That's part of Andrew, hi. The data that you are referring to actually comes from the executive summary that the MTA produced.
February 2012.
Yes.
Produced a final report which includes a significant table which has the level of congestion delays at key points along the route, showing doubling and tripling of the length of delay at many points, not all points, but different amounts at different points, 31st Avenue being one of the important ones.
One of the worst ones, as a matter of fact, was the intersection of Bowling and West End, and then the terrifying intersection where Harding Road, White Bridge, Woodmont now converge.
That document was suppressed for more than a year. It is not widely not available, as far as I'm aware now, on the MTA or the Transit Alliance website. So it's very difficult to get your hands on that document. And as far as I'm aware, the estimates of traffic congestion have not been updated since that document was produced.
That's right.
I have a question here, a handwritten question that came in for Council Lady Emily Evans. Could you describe for everyone a little bit, Emily, the role of the council, the role of the MTA in where we are right now? Who's been driving this, and of course the mayor's office as well?
Okay, so the process and,
yes.
Okay, the role of the council. Oh my goodness, there are a lot of people here. The role that the council has final say on capital spending by the metropolitan government and operating spending. So our job would be to approve the local portion of the capital required for the construction of the AMP, and then to approve any operating dollars which would be operating subsidies out of the operating budget. Do you want me to go into the process?
What about the MTA? For example, one of the questions was, did the Metropolitan Transit Authority, what role did they have? What did they approve as opposed to the council? For example, on the alternatives analysis, did the MTA approve that? Did the council committee look at it, or what?
The MTA is a separate entity of the metropolitan government, created, I believe, by state law. So we don't have jurisdiction over their day-to-day functions. Our primary responsibility is the power of the purse. So we can constrain or expand their functions by limiting or expanding the capital dollars, and they are very capital intensive, unlike most metro departments, which are dependent mostly on personnel and are more operating intensive. So in terms of the studies that they've done and the initiatives that they've undertaken with respect to the AMP, those have happened outside the purview of the council. But the funding piece absolutely is our responsibility.
Okay, questions in the audience? Thank you, Councilor. Get to you just a second.
Out of the current ridership, do we know how many of those currently pay fares? Because I understand that Metro employees and some state employees and some other groups do not currently pay fares to ride the MTA buses.
There are subsidies.
I don't, Vanderbilt is an employer which provides access to rides on the MTA through the student ID card and my faculty ID card. Vanderbilt pays a fee to the MTA for that service. How that's calculated, what the amount is, I don't know. And as far as I'm aware, the detailed finances of the MTA are secret.
Here's a question up here.
In regard to council approval, did the council not approve or disapprove the locally preferred alternative presented by the MTA?
The study, you mean?
Locally preferred alternative.
We did not. That would be under their purview. Our job is to just fund.
What is the locally approved alternative? Is
That's
it
the
BRT?
That's
Yeah.
the report.
The Federal Transit Administration requires that there be an analysis of alternatives, that there be several alternatives considered, and then the local authority chooses one of them and justifies it in their application for federal grant. In this case, the MTA considered building a railroad down the middle of the street, and they considered putting dedicated lanes down the middle of the street, and they said that putting dedicated lanes for buses is the locally preferred alternative. They did not consider the bus rapid transit as an option in their analysis.
Yes.
You go first. I'd like to know what happens to the interstate exits and entrances on the route, like the one up here by Murphy Road and then the one down on Lower Broad. If it's coming down the middle of the road, how do people get on to the interstates?
The answer, as far as we know, is that is the kind of thing that if this plan does go forward, will be completed in this engineering phase. The State Department of Transportation has a role to play in that, as does the Federal Highway Administration. So there's nothing on paper yet that we could go to fund that.
We have a written-in question on the finances again. Would you summarize the cost of, again, the cost, who's paying what under the plan? What happens if the state doesn't fund, for example, or the feds don't fund, for example? And also, what about how long, based on current ridership, would it take to pay the cost of the AMP?
Well,
or to put another way, how much would a subsidy would be required? Do we know any of those numbers? Have any of that been
the
provided?
numbers that we know are the numbers that we have used to you, I think from the very first time we started, which essentially are their numbers. It is they who projected that the cost would be $175 million, or 174 and some pocket change, but let's just round it off. Now, originally, and I believe, Malcolm, check me on this, I believe that application that they submitted included $35 million from the state. And if you've been reading or listening, you understand that probably shouldn't continue to be in there, because the state apparently has no interest in funding to that extent or funding for that project. Then the request to the Small Starts program was for $75 million. And you have a recommendation, which I pointed to in my remarks, that if in fact it gets through, that it get $27 million. So although we have no announced or even discussed dedicated funding source coming from the city, I don't have my calculator on me, and I'm too nervous in front of this many people to try to do that kind of math. But whatever's left, plus, as has been pointed out, the cost of any property that had to be obtained in order to have the safe widths of the roadway, whatever's left would be up to the city.
And Council Lady Evans, where are you? Oh, there you are. If the state does not fund the 35 million, what will the council do, or what options will be available to the mayor and to the council?
When I was urging the pro-AMP people to attend this forum for the last couple of weeks, and I told them I was going to come and I was going to answer questions, I warned them that some of my comments might be interpreted as anti-AMP, and this is going to be one of them. If I expect, and I think most people expect, that if the state does not fund the AMP, and there's no indication that they will anytime soon, then the mayor will ask the council for the difference. So instead of the 50 million-ish that we would approve, it would be more like 80, 85 million.
Thank you. Mayor Hunt, back in the back.
I have asked this question before, but I don't think I've ever gotten an answer. West End is the main drag of all the hospitals in the city. What are their plans to do with the emergency vehicles and the going up and down West End?
The original AMP plan had a 2-inch or so bump on the outside of the bus lane to deter vehicles from moving into the dedicated lane for buses. When many citizens raised the issue about emergency vehicles, that bump went away. So there's to be no barrier for buses to move out of the bus lane or for other traffic to move in, no physical barrier. That was done in a way to allow let's say the fire department to notify the MTA that the fire truck was coming. The AMP bus is supposed to be able to pull out of the dedicated lane, and a fire truck or an ambulance could then travel along the dedicated lane where the bus would normally go. That is the current plan for the emergency vehicles.
Mayor Hunt, back in the back.
Thank you. Back to Council Lady Evans. You've helped me in my research on this project a little bit, but if you could share for everyone else, when it comes to the question of the 50 or 85 or whatever million that might have to come locally, can you share how we better understand what, from an economics consideration standpoint, would be the opportunity cost of that, which is what projects, what things, whether that be schools, whether that be parks, whether that be safety, that would be deferred or not done at all because the money was instead spent on the bus?
I have not personally done that analysis, so I don't think I can answer your question directly, except to say, regardless of what capital projects you choose, whether that's an AMP, a convention center, sidewalks, schools, what have you, what you pick means you're not going to pick other things. In the short run, in order to be a fiscally sound city, we have to choose. It's a zero-sum game in the short run. So I don't know what things we would have to give up. I can tell you we will have to give up something. The school system, for example, needs about $60–70 million a year to maintain and renovate and keep the schools in top shape. And we've been giving it roughly half that for the last 8 years because we've chosen other things. And so so I would expect that to continue. And that might also be interpreted as anti-AMP, but those are the facts.
Let me go with one question up here, Jim, in just a second. There are a number of questions, Malcolm, about the alternative, the BRT alternative. And one of them is this, that the BRT light on Gallatin Road and Murfreesboro Road seems to be working pretty well. It's increased reportedly user ridership by some 50%. Could you amplify your comments a little bit about the BRT? Why shouldn't we try BRT light or something like that along West End Avenue or the East Corridor to see how it works? And if so, what might be the cost of that, increased cost? Do we have any idea what that might be, if anything?
BRT light does involve some cost. There are better shelters, an increased number of buses to have a more frequent bus service, the signaling, the computer adaptive traffic signaling goes along with the bus rapid transit and improves the quality of that. So there are a number of ways in which the bus rapid transit idea can involve cost and yield a significantly better bus service. But I certainly believe that that is an incremental way to increase bus ridership. It's a sensible way of improving the quality of public transportation. And if the ridership responds and we increase, are able to justify increasing the frequency of buses, then at some point some bus priority lane might make sense.
Did everybody get the point that the BRT involves the buses at the curb while the AMP involves, okay, the buses down the middle? Okay, there were a few late arrivals and I wanted to be sure everybody was wide awake here. Good deal. Mayor Hunt.
Thank you. This is a question of clarification for Council Lady Evans. This money would come from the capital improvements budget, so in effect, if it's 50 or 85 million, basically we're borrowing this money for 30 years, or whatever the bond is. So really, what is our long-term cost? It's going to be much more than the 50 or the 85 million, because this is like another mortgage payment.
Yeah, you know when you get your mortgage, you know you borrow money for your house, you get that total cost and your heart stops. We don't do that in government. But typically, if you inflate the money you borrow by another 40%, that gets you roughly to what the total cost of borrowing is. Interest rates have been going up, so it's probably off a little bit, but that's a good rule of thumb to use. So take 50 or 80 million, and then add to that 40% of the borrowed amount, and you're there.
Hi, I got a statement and then a question. Thanks again for taking the time to educate us on this program. For one, along West End, we have retail and restaurant. Retail and restaurant depend on left turns into their business to remain successful. Along with the metered parking spaces for their customers to easily come and visit them. Now, being that I am in retail, the question is, have we calculated the opportunity loss in sales tax collection?
The answer is no.
Go ahead, Mayor Hunt, you got some.
I came in a few moments late, so I may have missed something, but I have heard that if the federal government borrows $27 million from China to pay for, or to give to Nashville for the AMP, and then the most the city is looking at putting in, the city would put in is $80 million, that's $107 million. And so where does the other come from if the state's not paying?
The big picture is the $175 million project. I have the financial document on hand. $75 million is programmed to come from the Federal Transit Administration over several years. The program was $35 million from state government and roughly $65 million, $60 million, and then there's another small sliver from the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So 65, 35, and 75 in round numbers are the local, state, and federal components of the plan which is in place.
But if that never comes, is the city then on the hook for the remainder? Because with that, I mean, I heard from 50 to 85, but then you're talking about
If
a
the
whole lot
federal
more than
money
that.
is not coming, then this project will not go forward. The mayor has said that. It is conditional on the federal contribution. If the federal comes through, then, and the state does not, then the document suggests that Metro would consider and would invite the Metro Council to approve additional capital funds to fund the balance.
One of the problems I've seen with this is that from what you read and what we're told, this is not a question of are we going to have this AMP, but when? It's right away. They're working on it today. They've already spent $7.5 million studying it. Every day they're working away on it. There's no assurance that the federal government will put up any money. Maybe the 27 million, but we're asking for 75 million. Who knows if that'll come in future budgets. I think these kind of meetings should have been held before the city decided we're just going to plow forward with yet another project that our children and grandchildren will pay for. It's not even one that appears to be workable. This is, to me, quite a big mistake, and I think all of these meetings and all of this discussion should have been had before the city just said, this is what we're going to do. That's it.
Thank you, Lee. David Smythe, I'm an attorney in town. Emily, if Professor Getz were to prepare a proposal that the council adopt a plan for HRT, would you support that plan and attempt to pass an alternate plan for HRT as articulated by Professor Getz?
BRT? The charter, the Metropolitan Charter, gives the power to propose a capital budget to one guy, and that's the mayor. So most of the proposing, and that's the way it works, the mayor proposes, the council opposes. We're not there to propose things, that's the mayor's job. We're there to check his power, and that's the law.
Well, let me ask you this, Council Lady. Can you go in quietly and speak to the mayor? And hey, say, Mayor, I was out here at the Belle Meade United Methodist Church, and there was a good idea proposed by Malcolm Getz or something like that, not kind of informally. Would something like that work?
You must not know me very well. Yes, that's certainly a possibility, and there are other council members here who may have urged that, but that's certainly a possibility.
Well, that is a possibility, and I'd love to be that fly on the wall, by the way, when you do that. But not to give you Civics 101, the very fact that, John, that you asked this question and that it clearly resonated with the people in this room, you all are the people who can write the mayor or call the mayor and ask him to consider an alternate plan.
We don't want to ignore there are a few at least one council person in the audience. If they want to speak up, we're glad to have them comment on any of these things. So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes to go, so let's keep these going. This good discussion.
Along those same lines, the BRT Lite seems like a vastly superior system compared to the AMP as proposed. What is the cost of the BRT Lite compared to the AMP if we went that direction?
It depends on the detail of the proposal. So
could we say it's substantially less than the cost of an AMP?
Yes.
And when we put, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when we put the BRT on Gallatin Road in, that was in the capital budget. I can look that up. If you will email me at emily.evans@nashville.gov, I'll get you that number.
Good.
How much tax money has actually already been spent I know that it comes with a lot of cloaks and daggers, and I'm just wondering, I mean, we hear numbers thrown out, but $7.5 million for the studies. There's been a lot more spent. Do we have any idea how much more?
No, but I can look. I mean, I know the council appropriated $7.5 million in pre-development costs, but that's all we have done. Now, there could be other things coming out of the MTA operating budget, which is a pretty skinny budget, so I kind of doubt it. I think what they're working with is mostly the $7.5 million that we approved, I guess it was last year.
Here's a good practical question from someone in the audience, Malcolm, and that is, with either the AMP or BRT light, will city bus service be cut back, or will city bus service continue along those routes? In other words, if we have the AMP or BRT light along West End, will we also have the same bus service that we have now, or what?
That's a really good question, and the AMP, as I commented, the AMP plan is to scale back quite dramatically the local bus service. And I believe on Murfreesboro Road that the local bus service has been scaled back there as well. So my sense would be that there is an appropriate balance to be struck between the local service and the limited stop service that characterizes New York City, it characterizes Los Angeles. I believe that the MTA has tilted strongly toward the limited stop service and has pruned the local service considerably.
Thank you for coming to speak tonight. I understand that the federal government has to review a lot of these safety studies and the road studies, and that's in the environment studies, and they're currently doing that based on the preliminary design that was submitted last fall. Is there an upcoming public comment period, and is there any involvement that we can take at that point?
There will be a public comment period. It has not been announced, but there will be a public comment period, and I think the public comment period lasts 30 days.
Has there been an analysis of what will happen to the lanes in other streets like Charlotte, Hillsborough, Estes, when the traffic on West End, it becomes so much more congested?
That's a great question, Fred. Thank you. And to my knowledge, the analysis of the effect on other major arterial roads has not been done, and that the analysis of the local cut-through traffic in neighborhoods has been cursory at this point. So certainly when a new round of documents are produced and the 30-day comment period comes, that analysis surely must contain exactly the kind of analysis of effect on traffic on Wedgwood, on Hillsborough Road, all of the avenues from the interstate exits into the Midtown area are going to see dramatic increases in traffic congestion as a consequence of the reduced capacity for traffic on West End. So surely that analysis must be done, but at this point, as far as I'm aware, it has not been done.
Yes, I have a question or a statement, however you want to look at it. Vanderbilt University is an island that's in the middle of several streams. Blakemore is a stream on the south, 21st Avenue is a stream down the east side, West End is the stream in front of it. Vanderbilt's a rock in that stream. If you narrow any one of those streams around it, it's going to flow down the other parts of it. I know the university knows who goes to the hospital, the clinics. I know they know about the people that come to work there and so on, and if you take push pins and put them in a map, they know where they are and where they're coming from and the times they're coming in. In all of the executive summaries and stuff, I've not seen anything that says, here's the first year this AMP would be in operation, here's the ridership it would take off, but here's the impact because of the narrowing of these lanes on the institution
that's the rock in the streams. And I've not seen that analysis. I wondered if you guys had.
No, I have not seen that analysis, no.
We do know that there is some great concern about the quadrant where the medical complex at Vanderbilt sits.
My question addresses eminent domain. I live in Cherokee Park, and the area of West End that I come out on has only 5 lanes available, and obviously eminent domain is going to have to be exercised. And what I'm wondering is, will that create a roadblock for the AMP? Can they just exercise eminent domain and property owners can do nothing about it, or could people bring legal action that might tie up the AMP for years?
Sounds like a legal question. Go ahead. Diane.
No, go ahead, you start.
Given
and
the
I'll finish.
disastrous consequences for eminent domain with the convention center, I would think that this community would be quite attentive to any exercise of eminent domain in this for this project.
Essentially, Grace, it would make the project extremely expensive, and I think that's something that they're considering, whichever of those things.
It probably would not slow the project down, though.
From a legal standpoint, you real estate lawyers, correct me if I'm wrong, if the city has the power of eminent domain in a particular situation for public purpose, they get the property, and then there's a fight over the value of the property. So that's why they would get the property, but you'd be a lawsuit about how much it's worth. Yeah. Let's see, back here.
I'm Carol Hornberger, and I share all the concerns about the negative impact, but I have not been to any earlier meetings, so I'm just wondering why this particular plan was developed to solve the nightmare that is West End Avenue. So moving people from East Nashville to West Nashville, and I'm not sure a lot of us would raise our hands that we ride the buses regularly, so I'm in the car stuck on West End. What exactly was this supposed to solve, and what other plans could solve West End?
I'll sort of, since process is my thing, it's a good question. You know, I've done a lot of issue development over the years on a number of different things, and the process normally is you go out and you explain the problem to people, and you educate them on the problem, and then you let them talk about problems, and people are cool when they come to meetings like that. They start coming up with solutions. So then you have another set of meetings where you talk about possible solutions, and then in the end, 2 years of work into it, you come up with a proposal. As far as I can tell, that didn't happen here. I think the decision was made that we're going to do this, and now we're trying to piece together all of that issue development that didn't happen, which is why we're really over our skis on this one. So I think the short answer is there are lots of meetings, but probably not in your neighborhood, and you didn't know about them.
I have a quick question for Diane. And Diane, I've heard, and I'm not certain of this, but I know that you know a lot more about it than I do, that the city had a similar study done just a few years ago about this type of project. Have you been able to, or have we been able to get a copy of that? Is it something that the council lady may get for us? Or do you know much about that, or am I way off base?
Well, are you referring to the plan in the late 90s that would, the chamber was very supportive of a plan that would have run light rail
to Murphy Road.
The plan was going to be down the east-west corridor.
Yeah, to Murphy Road.
Yeah, east-west corridor to Murphy Road. Is that possibly what you're referring to, John?
I've just heard that there has been another plan that was not in favor of this type of proposal, and I was curious if you had any detail about it.
No.
And again, as
I
I
have
said,
not.
I just heard that.
No.
We have time for just a couple of more questions. So those of you that want to put it, let's get quick questions and quick answers.
My name's John Carnes, and there was an amendment to House Bill 2156 yesterday, in the Tennessee legislature that states that only curbside lanes can be used for mass transit or BRT or the AMP. If anyone could expand on that, I would appreciate that. On a state highway.
Was anybody up there yesterday stay in the Transportation Committee?
What's the question?
The question is, yesterday at state, they passed part of the bill on transportation bill.
They're basically trying to mandate curbside BRT instead of down the middle. And as appealing as this might be, if you don't want the project, I really would discourage letting the state manage these things. But that's what that bill does.
Okay.
Malcolm called this route of West End our parade route, and then Diane was talking about eminent domain. Does West End have any kind of protection? It has been declared a state scenic route, and that area between, with all of those fabulous old homes, that is all a historically protected area with the synagogues, churches, schools, all that between I-440 and St. Thomas, I know at least. And the neighborhoods on both sides of there are historically known neighborhoods. How can Metro decide that they're going to rip up a historically, a scenic route of the state and take over and destroy all of those fabulous stone walls and all those historical buildings to make sidewalks and such? How does that work?
Well, we would take the land through eminent domain, and although I find it very unlikely that we would take historic structures, because federal law requires you to mitigate when using federal funds when there's a historic property in the way. It doesn't stop it, but it does require mitigation. And given the political environment, I would expect that that would be avoided at all costs.
I think that as we wrap this thing up, and
Lee,
there'll be, yes.
I do want to say one thing.
Diane, go ahead.
I referred to this in my opening remarks. We have listened at every one of these forums where we've presented. We have listened to questions, and we have listened to comments, and we have talked to a heck of a lot of people. I am in church. So we do have an alternative plan, and we have some copies available if you would like to take a look at it. And I put my glasses
Where are the copies? Who has, are they in
Are
the back?
the copies in the back?
Okay. They're back in the back, okay.
And there is our post office box, or you could go to the website if you wanted to comment on this. I've just taken a look at this myself, but you will see that it incorporates many of the features that Malcolm was talking about in his remarks, and we welcome your comments as well.
Council Lady Evans, you have final remarks on process.
No one asked these questions, so I'm going to offer them nonetheless. The question is the approval process through council, because I know most of the people here probably object, and you're going to want to know what your pathways are to express your opposition. Assuming the mayor proposes the AMP in the next capital budget, which would be this summer, and this, what I'm describing to you, would apply to next summer too. Typically, the capital improvement budget is proposed in May and approved in June. If he includes the AMP this year, and without the state funding, he will have to put a new item in the capital improvement budget. There is about $50 million in there right now that's already approved. Capital improvement budget is subject to a public hearing at the council and 3 readings. So you'll be able to come, talk about it, and have your voice heard with respect to that. Same thing happens if he proposes it next summer. If the mayor proposes it on an interim basis, meaning not part of the usual budget cycle, which he has done once. He can do that, and only he can do that. And he needs, unlike the regular cycle, when he's off cycle, he has to have 27 votes, which I don't think he'll risk, but it's easier to fight it at that point. If the project is approved in the capital improvement budget, then it would be incorporated into a capital spending plan. A capital spending plan is basically a bond resolution. It is the city giving ourselves permission to issue municipal bonds. Bond resolutions, particularly GO bond resolutions, which is what is being proposed here, are subject to referendum call if 10% of voters sign a petition and that petition is approved by the clerk. And that would be, it's 10% of registered voters, that would be on the order of about 35,000 signatures, which sounds like a lot, but in this day and age, it's not hard to get. So those are sort of the places where you would object: public hearing, referendum process, and then finally, of course, you can always get in touch with your respective council people and try and convince them that they should vote the way you want them to. If there are any questions about that, you can see me up here after the meeting.
One of the real crimes of the council is that they have term limits. Some of you might like term limits, but because of term limits, we're going to lose Emily Evans at the end of this, at the end of her term, which is coming up.
Even if we didn't have term limits. Term limits are the single worst thing that's happened to the metropolitan government, and if you have a chance to vote against them, I ask you to do it. I'm not running for anything again, but that's my one soapbox tonight.
Don't believe she's not going to run for something sometime. Anyway, Emily, thank you so much. You've added so much to this.
And I would like to simply add a special word of thanks to Diane Neal, to Malcolm Getz for a wonderful evening, and also to the Belle Meade United Methodist Church for allowing us. We appreciate it. We are adjourned.
And thank you to Lee Barfield, too. Let's don't forget Lee. Thank you all very much for your attendance.